Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Hey friends, tonight we step into the blistering olive-scented world of ancient Greece, a place often wrapped in the romance of philosophy, democracy, and marble heroes who apparently had no use for pants. But behind the poetry of Plato and the perfection of Parthenon pillars, there's another Greece. One that's quieter, grittier, and far more human. Because while this civilization birthed the framework of Western thought, it didn't hand that gift down in golden goblets. It came at a cost. And for the average soul living in those sun-scoured streets, life wasn't a myth. It was survival. Before we get deep, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if this kind of storytelling speaks to you. Drop a comment below, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time the past is knocking on your door. It's a small ritual, but it reminds us that while we're diving into history, we're doing it together. Now dim the lights. Let the hum of a fan fill the background, and let's drift back. Not to the marble halls of philosophers, but to the cracked stones of everyday life. Welcome to ancient Greece. Your day doesn't begin with a gentle alarm. It begins with heat, dense, oppressive, and already claiming your body before you've even sat up. The sun has turned your home into an oven, and your modest mud brick walls offer no mercy. There are no windows as you know them, just wooden shutters that creak in the wind and do little to keep the world out. There's no AC humming, no soft mattress beneath you, just straw, maybe a mat if fortune is kind. Your pillow? The crook of your arm, or a bunched-up cloak that smells faintly of sweat and olive oil. Maybe lice shared your bed last night. Maybe they always do. You're not grossed out. You're resigned. There's no other option. You don't rise with intention. You rise because it's unbearable to stay horizontal, because the stones beneath you have stored yesterday's fire and your skin is already remembering it. In winter, the cruelty flips. Those same stones leach warmth from your bones, and you shiver in a thin wrap of cloth, teeth chattering beside family members who are just as cold, just as tired. There's no heated floor, no steaming mug, no real separation between and necessity. You make do, or you don't. And then there's water. You want to wash your face? That means walking, sometimes far. Clay jars on your shoulder balanced with aching care, praying you don't trip and spill not just water, but hours of effort. There's no morning shower, no sink to splash from. You cleanse with ritual and scraping, a curved striggle peeling away oil and dust like you're trying to remember who you are underneath it all. There's no such thing as privacy. Not in your morning, not in your house. You eat, sleep, fight, and grow in the same room as your entire family. Your space is not a sanctuary. It's shared, noisy, cluttered with life and livestock. The family goat might be the only one with a guaranteed corner. And the street outside, it's not just a road. It's your news feed, your community board, your garbage pile. It's where you catch gossip and step in yesterday's waste. It's alive, like everything else around you. Crude, imperfect, and inescapably human. So before we place laurels on ancient Greece, let's remember the soil they grew from. The raw, resilient lives of those who woke up sweating, trudged through dust, and found dignity not in statues but in the daily act of continuing. Tonight, we honor them. You haven't even eaten yet, and already your back aches. A dull, familiar throb that reminds you, this body, this life, isn't made for comfort. Sweat beads down your neck, your tunic clings in all the wrong places, and somehow this is the easiest part of your day. You've made it through the night, through the stifling heat of a Greek bedroom where the air barely moves. You're still breathing. Time to eat, if you can call it that. Welcome to breakfast in ancient Greece, more a ritual of survival than nourishment. A meal so stark, it makes modern fasting look like a feast. Your first taste of the day, barley bread, maza, dry, dense, a little sour if you're lucky, a little moldy if you're not. It's less food and more fuel, a hardened reminder that hunger doesn't care about flavor. Shaped by calloused hands, baked in yesterday's ashes, it's the closest thing to sustenance you'll get until nightfall. You dunk it in watered-down wine. Not for taste. For safety, the water alone could kill you, but the wine cuts the risk. Children drink it. Elders too, not because anyone enjoys it, but because life here is built on necessity, not pleasure. If the gods are kind, or you have connections, you might score a fig, a bitter olive, a smear of goat cheese, but don't count on it. You're not a philosopher or a landowner. You're a worker, a woman, a son in someone else's house. You eat what's left, if there is anything left. No eggs, no coffee, no honeyed fruit. Just the silence of chewing stale bread and the knowledge that this will have to be enough. And don't expect conversation. There are no chairs, no forks, no time to linger. You eat with your hands. You nod, you move on. If you're a woman, you don't even sit with the men. You wait. You watch them eat first, and when they're done, you gather what remains and pretend it's a meal. The irony? These are the same people who gave us epics and symposiums, gods of wine and poetry. But breakfast? Breakfast is a shadow of a feast, a quiet act of endurance. It's not celebrated, it's endured. You chew, you swallow, you carry on, because that's what the day demands. And now that you've managed to choke down your barley brick and a splash of sour wine, it's time to freshen up, a phrase that feels almost laughable here. Cleanliness isn't the goal. Ritual is. There's no soap, no sweet smell of mint or lavender. You pour cold water over tired skin, maybe at a public fountain if you're lucky. It wakes you, but it doesn't refresh you. You rub a little oil on your body, olive if you have it. It doesn't cleanse, it coats. A thin armor against the dust, the heat, the day ahead. No privacy, no sponge unless you've stolen one, no luxury, just a basin, a body, and the quiet strength it takes to begin again. And somehow you do. Every morning you rise, you eat, you wash. You carry the weight of survival with quiet grace, no praise, no poetry, just the rhythm of living in a world that asks much and gives little. But you endure, because that too is a kind of greatness. Instead of soap, you reach for olive oil, not to soften your skin, not to glow, but to draw out the sweat, the grime, the dust of the day clinging to your body like shame. You rub it in slowly, deliberately, then drag a bronze strigil across your limbs, a curved blade scraping your skin bare, leaving behind a slick sheen and the faint sting of self-consciousness. This is not luxury, it's survival. It's skincare as ritual, not refinement, and you do it in front of others. Naked, loud, laughing maybe, or pretending not to care. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene is communal. And privacy? That's a myth. Now let's move to your mouth. No toothbrush, no minty foam. Maybe, if you're lucky, a bit of charcoal to rub into your gums. A swish of vinegar if you're fancy. But most days, you chew on a twig and pray to the gods that no one gets too close. Dental care isn't a routine, it's an act of hope. And as for scent, let's just say the word deodorant hasn't been whispered into existence yet. Perfume exists, sure, but it's precious, reserved for those whose robes touch coin more often than river stone. So you dab a little rose oil on your neck, a touch of myrrh on your wrists, then you walk 5 miles in the sun, sandals slapping against dirt and heat, and the fragrance turns to something else entirely, a signature blend of musk, fatigue, and the slow erosion of dignity. Laundry? Rare. Clothes are pounded against rocks, not washed in basins. If you're poor, and most are, your tunic is likely still wearing the ghost of last season's festival wine. Because here, hygiene isn't about radiance, it's about reducing your offense. You scrape, scrub, and sweep yourself clean, only to step outside and immediately begin the process of coming undone again. And now that you've exfoliated with oil and communal shame, it's time to get dressed. Your wardrobe? 2 choices, a khitan or a himation. Both are oversized rectangles, linen, unstructured, uncooperative. You wrap, you pin, you pray. No underwear, no bras, just folds of fabric that shift like dunes with every breeze. One gust, and your dignity is public knowledge. Shoes? If you're blessed, sandals. If not, bare feet. You walk over sunlit stones, donkey droppings, the aftermath of the morning market, all baked into the earth like a curse. There is no sunscreen, no shade, just the Aegean sun burning through philosophy, ambition, and linen. By midday, you're cooked. Your shoulders are blistered, your robe clings in places best left undescribed, and your skin hums with the kind of heat that doesn't ask permission. And nudity? It's not scandal. It's scenery. Men wrestle naked in gymnasiums. Politicians speak from togas that whisper of unraveling. If you're wealthy, maybe your tunic blushes in hues of saffron or soft violet, dyed in decadence. But for the rest, it's brown, beige, off-white, the color of labor and anonymity. So you walk wrapped like a linen burrito, praying your pin holds and your modesty doesn't collapse before the priestess walks by. Ancient Greece gave us democracy, beauty, and brilliance, but a decent shower? still a dream waiting to be born. And the worst part? You're only halfway through your chores. Welcome to ancient Greece, where being a soldier isn't a career choice. It's your birthright, your burden, and all too often, your death sentence. If you're a free male citizen, especially in Athens or Sparta, congratulations. You've inherited a legacy not of ease, but of duty. You are a soldier, not by choice, but by expectation. By your early teens, your childhood is already behind you. You're trading toys for wooden weapons, games for formation drills, and innocence for the cold geometry of the phalanx. Shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, praying the man next to you doesn't falter and drag you both down. In Sparta, it's harsher still. At 7, you're thrown into the Aoge system, a brutal, soul-forging regime of hunger, pain, isolation. Not training, trial by fire. They strip away your softness until only iron remains. You don't survive childhood. You endure it. In Athens, the system is less savage, but no less binding. 2 years of military training, followed by a lifetime on standby. No exceptions. Not even for the thinkers. Even Socrates, the great philosopher, marched into battle, not with words, but with spear and shield. In Greece, thought and war are not separate paths. They run parallel like veins of duty and destiny. And there is always a war. Sparta versus Athens, Athens versus Persia, Sparta versus everyone. Peace isn't peace. It's just intermission. If you're lucky and wealthy, you can buy armor. Bronze helmet, cuirass, greaves, hoplon, spear. If you're poor, your armor is hope. You borrow, patch together what you can, and pray the arrows miss. Because in Greece, you don't just fight the war, you finance it. Bring your own bronze, or die trying. When you're not bleeding, you're preparing to bleed. Training. Drilling. Debating war in the assembly. Rowing the triremes until your hands blister and your back breaks. Because yes, the gods won't row those warships for you. There is no glory package, no retirement, no pension, no therapist, only scars and silence. And if you're lucky, a gravestone, weather-worn, poorly carved, calling you brave. Think that's brutal? Try being a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, you have fewer rights than the family earn. No vote, no voice, no land. And heaven forbid you're seen outside too often. They'll whisper, courtesan, or worse, Spartan. You rise before the sun, and your day begins in visible labor. You spin, you weave, you grind, you bake, you carry, you raise. You are the engine behind the household, the silent architect of stability. But you are not praised, not paid, not freed. You are responsibility without recognition. Your world is the gymnasium, the women's quarters. Your windows are latticed with separation. Plays, debates, the gymnasium all belong to the men. Even education eludes you. Maybe, if you're fortunate, you'll learn to read your husband's name. But geometry, philosophy, thought itself, that's not yours to hold. Your duty, marry well, bear sons, and be so quiet. The world forgets you were ever there. Marriage isn't a choice. It arrives early, sometimes before your voice has even deepened or your body has fully grown. You're handed off in your early teens to a man old enough to be your father, chosen not by love but by arrangement. A transaction, sealed by your father as if you were currency, less a daughter, more a deal. Love? That's a luxury, not a requirement. But dowries? Non-negotiable. And once you bear children, your worth narrows to one thing, your womb. Your identity dissolves into how many sons you can produce, how strong their backs, how fit their bodies. And yet, Sparta stood apart. Spartan women were seen as freer. They trained their bodies. They learned to read. They could own land. It sounds empowering until you look closer. That freedom came tethered to a state obsessed with war and bloodlines. Your body wasn't your own. It was a vessel, a national asset. Your honor depended on how well you birthed warriors. And if you failed, disgrace followed. Even then, your independence was an illusion. If your husband died, you couldn't inherit much. Remarrying required permission. Your path narrowed. Doors closed. Options faded until you were locked in place, your world shrinking with every year. And yet these were the same people who worshipped goddesses of wisdom and strength. Athena with her shield, Artemis with her bow. Divine women roamed the myths freely, fiercely. But mortal women? They were expected to be shadows, silent, stationary, small. Athens, the so-called cradle of democracy, the shining ideal of civic voice. And yes, technically they invented it, but before you celebrate, ask yourself, would you have been allowed to speak? Probably not. To vote in Athens, you had to be a man, born of Athenian parents, over 18. That's it. So where did that leave the rest? Women, foreigners, enslaved people, children. The vast majority, almost 90%, had no voice, no vote, no power. This wasn't democracy for the people. It was democracy for a very exclusive brotherhood, a sun-soaked club of men in sandals writing rules for the world, while the rest of it watched from the shadows. If you met the criteria, you didn't just vote, you were expected to live and breathe civic duty. Democracy in ancient Athens wasn't a passive right. It was an unrelenting demand. Laws weren't quietly passed in hidden chambers. They were debated, shaped, and shouted into being in massive assemblies of thousands. There were no polished politicians, no seasoned professionals. Every eligible man was at once a lawmaker, a juror, a statesman, and an overconfident amateur. One day, you could be randomly selected to oversee the city's finances. The next, to decide a man's fate in a courtroom. Not because you were qualified, but because the system believed in chance more than expertise. Your fishmonger might be in charge of military supplies. Your uncle, who swears the sea sings at night, could be passing judgment in a murder trial. And if you rose too high, became too beloved, too loud, ostracism. Once a year, citizens could scrawl a name on a shard of pottery, an ostracon, and vote to exile someone for 10 years. No defense, no appeal, just gone. Not because you broke a law, because you threatened comfort or power, or simply irritated the crowd. And yet, for all its chaos and contradictions, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. For the first time, ordinary men, some ordinary men, had a voice. It carved the earliest foundations of what would become modern political systems. But let's not romanticize it. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't just. If you were a woman, you were silenced before you even tried to speak. If you were foreign-born, even if you paid taxes, you were invisible. If you were a slave building the Parthenon, your sweat-funded glory you could never touch. And if you dared to question too deeply, to prod at the comfort of belief, you risked your life. Just ask Socrates. Democracy may have been born in Athens, but if you arrived hoping for equality, inclusion, or justice, you'd be escorted out of the assembly and told to bring your own ostracon. And then there was slavery, not just tolerated, expected. Even modest households had slaves, not as a luxury, but because slavery was as common as sandals and sunburn. The idea of a society without human ownership, that was absurd, unimaginable. Slaves weren't defined by race. They came from conquered territories. Thracians, Scythians, Syrians, even fellow Greeks who lost the wrong war. Some were born into chains, others were stolen, sold, traded like livestock. It was a brutal, thriving market, and it never ran dry. In Athens, a slave could cook your meals, raise your children, carry your groceries, and still be forced to stand silent while you dined. Some ran businesses or managed accounts while their owners lay on cushions sipping wine and debating justice, a kind of hypocrisy so sharp it almost glistens. In the silver mines of Laurion, even children crawled through pitch-black tunnels, choking on dust, dying slow deaths to fund civic ambition. Some slaves were literate. They taught math and grammar. They managed books. But don't be mistaken, they were still property. They could be beaten, branded, sold, killed, and the law would not blink. Because in this golden cradle of democracy, freedom was a privilege, not a right. And that privilege was fiercely guarded. The few who managed to claw their way out of bondage, freed men, were never truly free. Their chains became invisible, but they were still there. They owed loyalty to their former masters, lived under constant scrutiny, and remained locked out of citizenship. No vote, no land, no real say, just the faint hope that tomorrow might hurt a little less than today. And unlike the later cries for abolition echoing through history, ancient Greece heard no such call. The minds that shaped Western philosophy, yes, even Aristotle, declared slavery not just acceptable, but natural. According to him, some people were born to be owned. Enlightening, isn't it? We often glorify ancient Greece for its gifts, democracy, ethics, philosophy, but those lofty ideals stood on the broken backs of people who had no voice, no rights, and no value in the eyes of the state. That's not a historical detail to skim past. It's the very bedrock beneath the temples and theories. Feeling sick in ancient Greece? Then may the gods be with you. Because unless Hippocrates himself happened to be your neighbor, your best shot at healing involved vague herbs, whispered prayers, and a heavy dose of hope. There were no hospitals, no sterile beds, no trained nurses. You stayed home. Maybe someone in your family remembered a salve or a ritual. Maybe the temple priest would chant to Asclepius while you clutched a snake for comfort. That was medicine. Greek physicians were part herbalist, part philosopher, part gambler. Their entire understanding of illness revolved around 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feel feverish? Too much blood. Let's drain some. Got a cough? Too much phlegm. Try fasting. Sad or melancholy? Must be black bile. Take a walk, stare into the sea, try to forget how fragile life is. Their treatments were more about belief than certainty. Crushed poppy seeds, boiled figs, a vinegar compress mixed with something scraped off a goat. If it worked, it was by grace, not science. If it didn't, and it often didn't, it added suffering to suffering. Surgery? That was a nightmare, only summoned as a last resort. There were no anesthetics, no antiseptics, only iron knives, bone saws, and frantic prayers. If you needed something cut or removed, you bit down on leather and screamed into the void. Childbirth was no less brutal. Midwives did what they could, but even a simple delivery could turn deadly. One wrong turn, one difficult labor, and 2 lives might be lost in a single night. If you were rich, maybe you could call in a traveling physician, someone with scrolls, tools, and perfumed oils. If you were poor, you relied on what your grandmother knew, what the street vendor swore by, or what your own body could endure. And if that wasn't enough, you simply didn't survive. But hey, at least they believed in rest, clean air, and a balanced diet. In a world without antibiotics or anesthesia, that's saying something. Ancient Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath, a sacred promise to do no harm. But it also gave us treatments like drink boiled cabbage water, as if wellness could be conjured from hope and hot vegetables. So yes, healthcare in ancient Greece was a strange blend of herbs, prayers, and clinging on for dear life. It was fragile, human, and trying like so much of life back then. And then there was theater. In ancient Greece, theater wasn't just a form of entertainment. It was ritual. It was civic engagement. It was a raw, public unraveling of the human condition. Let's start with what worked. Theater was free for citizens, and it's a heavy but, only if you were male, free, and native-born. Women, slaves, foreigners, mostly left out. That's the brutal footnote beneath the grandeur. Still, imagine it. You'd climb into a massive stone amphitheater carved into the side of a hill, like the Theater of Dionysus in Athens, squeezed shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other breathing, sweating souls. And you'd be there from dawn until dusk. The Dionysia Festival wasn't a show. It was a marathon. One play after another. Tragedies that crushed your spirit, comedies that mocked your leaders, and satyr plays that mixed myth with madness. No snacks, no bathroom breaks, no escape. Only art. If you were late or disruptive, you weren't just scolded, you could be fined. Art mattered that much. And the performances, they hit hard. Tragedies weren't just sad stories. They were emotional earthquakes. You watched families fall apart, heroes unravel, and gods punish mortals for sins they didn't even commit. You weren't there to be entertained. You were there to feel, to be torn open beside strangers, to cry not alone, but together. Then the comedies stormed in, loud, lewd, political. These weren't polite chuckles, they were outrageous. Imagine a roast, a protest, and a fever dream all rolled into one, complete with actors in towering phallic costumes and masks the size of dinner plates. The chorus didn't just sing. They yelled, danced, provoked. They were the voice of the people, echoing your thoughts in rhythm and rhyme. It was chaos. It was catharsis. And the audience, unruly and alive. They shouted, hissed, threw things. They didn't just watch, they reacted. Theater wasn't passive, it was participation. It was democracy wrapped in poetry and performance. At the end, a jury would decide who won. Imagine crying for 3 days over Orestes' pain, only to watch some absurd comedy with a talking pig god take the crown. That too was Greece. Glorious, frustrating, human. And if you survived all that, if you still had energy left in your soul, maybe you wandered into the agora. And there, amid the stalls and shouting vendors, you'd spot him. A man in a dusty cloak, barefoot, eyes burning with questions. He looks at you, not past you, and asks, "What is justice? Welcome to philosophy." In Athens, it was inescapable. It didn't happen in ivory towers, it happened in streets, in courtyards, and everyday conversations. It wasn't abstract, it was urgent. It was alive. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they weren't legends yet. They were odd men who spoke in riddles and made people uncomfortable. They didn't offer answers, they offered better questions. And in a city that loved its theater, its arguments, and its restless heart, that was enough to change the world. Take Socrates, a man who didn't just ask questions, he unsettled people. He made a life's work out of unraveling certainty, poking holes in people's confidence like it was a threadbare sweater. He wasn't there to comfort you, he was there to challenge you, relentlessly, unapologetically. You could be living your perfectly mundane Athenian life, buying olives, scratching a stray goat behind the ears, and then, like some philosophical storm cloud, he'd appear. Do you believe in truth? Sure. What is truth? And just like that, you'd spiral. 3 hours later, you're questioning the meaning of your existence and contemplating a quiet life in Sparta where nobody bothers you with metaphysics. He never wrote a single word down. Not one. That job fell to Plato, his student, who tried to capture the intensity of Socrates' dialogues before they disappeared like breath on a mirror. But even without a pen, Socrates left a legacy etched not in ink but in memory, myth, and the raw emotional confusion of everyone he interrogated. Athens eventually sentenced him to death. Officially, for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, but in truth, probably for being deeply exhausting at dinner parties. Philosophy back then wasn't a quiet scholarly pursuit, it was loud, messy, charged with ego and passion and the kind of mental wrestling that left you both exhilarated and drained. Debates didn't take place in ivory towers, they exploded in the streets, the markets, the open air. No microphones, just voices thrown into the wind, arms flailing, minds clashing. You couldn't just spectate, that wasn't allowed. Philosophers pulled you in. You walked past Plato's academy, and suddenly you were an unwilling participant in a live ethical crisis. One wrong phrase, and you were the new cautionary tale about ignorance. Even children weren't spared. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great, yes, that Alexander, the teenager who would one day redraw the map of the known world. Imagine being 16 and your tutor says, "Here's a globe, now go enlighten or conquer it." Philosophy gave birth to logic, ethics, political theory, and science. But in ancient Greece, it also handed you a migraine, a shattered sense of identity, and an unnerving awareness that a guy in sandals might ruin your day with one question. So let's say you've made it in Athens. You're eloquent, charismatic, politically engaged. People admire you. They listen to you. That's your first mistake. Because in this democracy, being too admired was dangerous. Not criminal, just suspicious. A little too much influence could trigger a completely legal form of exile called ostracism. Once a year, the citizens gathered, not to applaud you, but to decide if someone needed to disappear for a while. They'd scratch a name on a shard of pottery, an ostracon, and if 6,000 people agreed, you were out. No trial, no argument, no last words, just a quiet walk out of the city with your dignity and your sandals. You didn't have to be corrupt. You didn't need to do anything wrong. Maybe you were just too good at speeches, too beloved, too much. It was democracy defending itself from charisma. And here's the strangest part. Exile wasn't forever. 10 years later, you could return as if nothing had happened, pick up where you left off, maybe even run for office again. Because in Athens, ideas were everything, but so was balance. Influence was a gift and a threat. So you lived with one eye on the agora and the other on the nearest exit. Your property was untouched. Your citizenship remained. No grudges, just a decade-long vacation you never asked for. Some famous Athenians were ostracized. Aristides the Just was so well-liked that someone allegedly voted against him simply because they were tired of hearing about his virtue. Brutal. Even Themistocles, the military genius who saved Athens at the Battle of Salamis, was exiled once his confidence crossed the line. Turns out, gratitude has an expiration date. Ostracism was designed to protect Athens from tyrants, but more often than not, it punished success. If you were ambitious, you had to walk a razor's edge. Be respected, but not too much. Popular, but never charismatic enough to cause alarm. Think of it like an ancient reality show where winning too many fans meant exile to the countryside with nothing but your dignity and a stash of olive oil. Athens gave birth to democracy, but it also invented cancel culture, 2,500 years ahead of its time. In ancient Greece, you didn't ask if you would die young, you just wondered when and how painfully. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years, and that was only if you survived infancy. which was no small feat. Roughly 1 in 3 children didn't survive childhood, felled by disease, poor nutrition, and the fact that hygiene was more theoretical than actual. Death could come from anything: a simple scratch turning septic, an unexplained fever, childbirth, a leading cause of death among women, or even drinking from the wrong cup of water. Medicine was limited, and divine intervention was notoriously inconsistent. In the cities, disease spread fast. Cramped living quarters, open-air sewers, and communal fountains made epidemics a regular menace. The infamous plague of Athens during the Peloponnesian War wiped out 1/3 of the population. Thucydides documented it, contracted it himself, and somehow survived. Most weren't so lucky. War was a constant shadow. If you were a man, odds were you'd die holding a spear or rowing a trireme. Even if you survived battle, injuries often proved fatal days later. No antibiotics, no stitches, just hope and garlic compresses. And then there was always the risk of divine wrath. Offend a god, forget a sacrifice, mock a temple statue, or speak ill of Zeus after a few cups of wine, and you might find yourself struck down by lightning, plague, or even a rogue goat stampede. Burial rites were sacred. Without a proper funeral, coins for the ferrymen, rituals to secure your place in the afterlife, you might be cast outside city walls unmarked and forgotten. That wasn't just tragic, it was spiritually perilous. The Greeks believed unburied souls wandered endlessly, trapped between worlds. Death wasn't poetic, it was daily. It didn't care about your philosophy, beauty, or lineage. Slave, general, poet, it made no difference. You could die from a moldy fig or an angry mosquito. The Greeks had 12 Olympians, and none of them were your friend. In theory, ancient Greek religion sought harmony with the divine, worshipping Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Poseidon, and the golden pantheon atop Mount Olympus. In practice, it was constant spiritual damage control. These gods weren't loving or peaceful, they were divine drama queens with immense powers. Forget a sacrifice, they'd ruin your crops. Say the wrong prayer, your ship would sink. Step into the wrong grove, choose your curse: snakebite, plague, famine. The gods demanded more than loyalty. They demanded perfect timing, flawless rituals, and unwavering obedience. You didn't visit temples weekly. You performed daily rituals, maintained home altars, celebrated seasonal festivals, and took part in civic ceremonies. Before planting, you prayed to Demeter. Going to war, you offered to Ares. Traveling by sea, you poured wine for Poseidon, maybe sacrificed a goat just to be safe. Each god had favorites and grudges. Apollo might protect your city, unless your grandfather once insulted him. Then you were cursed until further notice. Hera was the goddess of marriage, but she also specialized in making mortal women's lives miserable if Zeus so much as looked at them. Athena rewarded wisdom, and also turned people into spiders. Casual. And if the Olympians weren't enough to keep you nervous, there were nymphs, satyrs, spirits, river gods, and monsters lurking around every corner. Step on the wrong patch of sacred land, and suddenly your left leg belongs to a vengeful woodland sprite. But worst of all, you never knew why something bad happened. Was it the wrong offering? The wrong timing? Did you insult a god in a dream? Maybe it was your cousin. Maybe it was something your great-grandfather did. Doesn't matter. The gods worked in mysterious and deeply personal ways, and yet for all the terror, Greek religion was woven into every part of life, from politics to childbirth to the Olympic Games. You feared the gods, yes, but you also depended on them. Their temples were city landmarks, their festivals were national holidays, their myths explained everything from lightning to love. You didn't believe in gods out of faith, you believed out of survival instinct. So after everything, the sun-baked homes, the barley-bread breakfasts, the sandal-blistered treks, the wars, plagues, gods, and goat-related traumas, let's ask the question plainly. Would you last a single day in ancient Greece? Honestly, no. You'd fold before lunch. The heat, the diet, the constant threat of war or divine punishment would wipe that Instagrammable toga fantasy right off your face. You're not used to hauling water before breakfast or squatting over a hole in the ground next to a temple goat. You'd miss your running water, your aspirin, and your right to complain without being exiled by pottery shard. You might love the idea of living among marble statues, brilliant philosophers, and epic poets. But guess what? Those were the 1% of ancient Greece. For everyone else, it was backbreaking labor, limited rights, and frequent funerals. Your democracy, only if you're a male citizen. Your medicine, garlic, and hope. Your gods, frequently furious. Your social media, a guy yelling in the agora about justice while waving a fish. And yet, for all of that, the Greeks endured. They built temples that still stand, wrote plays we still perform, debated ideas we still wrestle with, and laid the groundwork for everything from astronomy to ethics. They didn't just survive hardship, they created civilization while sweating through it. You wouldn't last, but they did. Not because life was easy, but because they found ways to make meaning in a world full of chaos. They questioned everything, fought constantly, wrote beautifully, died young, and still somehow shaped the modern world. So no, you probably wouldn't make it past your first sunstroke, goat bite, or unsolicited philosophy lesson in the street. But if you did, if you adapted, endured, and listened closely, you'd find yourself standing among some of the most passionate, resilient, and brilliantly flawed people history has ever known. And they wouldn't judge you for struggling. They just hand you a tunic, point to the amphora and say, "Good. Now carry that up a hill." It began with a death and a betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what is now eastern England, had played the Roman game well. He had walked a tightrope for years, ruling as a client king under the shadow of Rome. He had wealth, autonomy, and peace, so long as he stayed useful to the empire. But when he died around 60 AD, he left behind a will that was meant to protect his people. He named the Roman emperor as co-heir alongside his two young daughters, hoping this gesture of loyalty would secure their safety and sovereignty. He was wrong. Rome did not honor the will. Rome didn't negotiate. Rome took. Without hesitation, the Roman authorities annexed the Iceni kingdom outright. Their soldiers stormed in and claimed everything: lands, livestock, homes, and treasures. But the theft of wealth wasn't the worst offense. It was what they did next that turned a political insult into a personal hell. They flogged the Queen Boudica in public, not just to humiliate her, but to send a message: you are nothing. And if that wasn't enough, they violated her daughters in front of her. This wasn't just a crackdown, it was psychological warfare, the kind meant to break a people's spirit. But it didn't break Boudica. It forged her. Rome believed it had crushed a minor tribal woman beneath its boot. What it had done was awaken a lioness, a queen who would take her pain and reshape it into vengeance, a mother whose rage would soon set cities ablaze, a woman who would remind Rome that even empires bleed. Word of the atrocity spread quickly through Britannia. Other tribes listened. They remembered their own humiliations, their own land losses, their own sons killed in Roman campaigns. Rome thought the tribes were divided, scattered. But in that moment, they had one thing in common: Boudica's fury. What began with Rome violating one queen would soon end with the empire reeling in fear. They had broken a treaty, broken a family, and in doing so, broken the illusion of Roman invincibility in Britannia. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that would ignite one of the most ferocious revolts Rome ever faced. If Rome expected Boudica to fade into silence, they misunderstood everything about her. Boudica wasn't born to obey. She was born to lead. Described by Roman historians, who rarely complimented their enemies, as tall, fierce, with flaming red hair cascading down her waist and a voice that sliced through crowds like a war horn. She wasn't just a queen by blood, she was a symbol, and now she was a threat. But before she became that threat, she became something deeper, a mother with nothing left to lose. Roman brutality had tried to erase her dignity, her children's future, and her people's pride. But Boudica refused to be a victim. She understood what Rome feared most wasn't an army, it was unity. And so she began to forge it, one tribe at a time. First, the Trinovantes. They had once been powerful before Rome crushed them under taxes, land seizures, and slave labor. When Boudica spoke, she didn't sound like a diplomat. She spoke like a warrior mother, scarred but unbroken. She reminded them of their ancestors, their gods, and the earth they no longer owned. Her pain was their pain, her rage, theirs too. Then the other tribes began to listen. The Corieltavi, the Cornovia, even some of the Brigantes. Her cause was no longer just about vengeance. It became a holy mission to cleanse Britannia of Roman arrogance. She didn't promise safety, she promised glory and death with honor if it came to that. And they followed her, because she didn't stand behind her warriors. She rode among them, spear in hand, hair loose in the wind, eyes locked on the future. She called out the names of the raped, the enslaved, the executed. She summoned gods like Andraste, the Celtic war goddess, as her witness, and her warriors believed her when she said the gods would fight with them. She had no formal military training, no Roman strategy scrolls, but she had something deadlier, righteous fury, sharpened by betrayal, guided by purpose. And the land itself seemed to shift under her command. This wasn't rebellion, it was resurrection. The Queen Rome thought it had broken was now the spearhead of a movement that would soon make the empire tremble, and she was just getting started. The Roman eagle had long soared over Britannia, but now the winds beneath its wings were changing. Boudica's fury wasn't a wildfire, it was a storm, building with terrifying purpose, and storms need fuel. That fuel came from thousands of Britons who had waited years, even generations, for someone to defy the empire. Someone to speak not in Latin, but in blood and iron. She gave them that voice. It started with war councils held under sacred groves and moonlit hills. Boudica didn't sit on a throne. She stood in the dirt with her people. She listened to the anger of tribal elders, to the sorrow of mothers, and to the chants of druids who saw omens in the sky. They all spoke one truth. Rome had pushed too far. Now it was time to push back. Warriors from the Trinovantes brought spears, slings, and ancient battle chants. The Iceni added cavalry, swift riders with wild hair and war paint, fierce and fearless. Other tribes joined with axes, blades, and torches. Even women took up arms, inspired by their queen. This wasn't just an army forming, it was a resurrection of Celtic identity. But Rome had trained legions, professional soldiers, armored, disciplined, lethal. Boudica had to make up for that with numbers, knowledge of the land, and something Rome could never teach: hatred forged in humiliation. Soon, Boudica's army swelled to tens of thousands. Farmers became warriors, hunters became assassins. Former Roman slaves and mistreated tribal allies switched sides. These weren't soldiers fighting for pay, they fought for memory, revenge, and the right to raise children without chains. She gave a speech, her first of many. Roman historians would later record her words, albeit with bias. But what echoes through time is clear. She vowed to win or die. There would be no surrender, no submission, no turning back. Then came the first target, Camulodunum. Once a British stronghold, is now a Roman colony littered with temples, statues, and villas. The Temple of Claudius stood as an insult, a shrine to the emperor who had conquered them. To Boudica and her warriors, it was not sacred. It was a provocation, and it would be the first to fall. The tribes were no longer whispering rebellion. They were marching toward it, armed with fury and led by a queen who refused to kneel. Camulodunum never stood a chance. The once proud Roman colony had become a symbol of everything Boudica's people despised. Its streets echoed not with tribal chants, but with Latin commands. Its buildings rose atop sacred ground, and towering over it all was the Temple of Claudius, a marble mockery built with forced labor, praising the emperor who had subjugated the Britons. To Rome, it was a monument. To Boudica, it was a target. She gave the order. What followed wasn't a siege, it was an execution. Her army descended like a tidal wave. Roman settlers, many of them veterans who had bullied and taxed the local tribes, were caught off guard. The city had no proper walls. The few Roman soldiers stationed there were poorly prepared, expecting peace, not war. They tried to hold the temple, barricading themselves inside, believing it could endure a siege. It didn't. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces breached it. The streets ran red. They spared no one. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Boudica's war wasn't just military, it was personal. Her warriors destroyed Roman statues, burned villas, and turned their rage onto the very symbols of occupation. The temple was set ablaze, its roof collapsing in a firestorm that lit the sky for miles. Survivors were rare, and those who did escape carried tales of horror that chilled Roman blood. The fury wasn't random, it was deliberate. These were people who had seen their homes taken, their gods mocked, their daughters sold. Now they were reclaiming what had been stolen with interest. Roman officials sent pleas for help to Governor Suetonius, who was hundreds of miles away in Wales, suppressing another rebellion. But by the time he heard of Camulodunum's fall, it was already ash and smoke. A colony destroyed, its citizens dead, and the flame of a rebellion rising higher. Boudica didn't stay to celebrate. There was no time. She knew Rome would respond, and hard, so she pressed on, knowing that each victory bought her momentum. Her next destination was a city larger, richer, and even more vulnerable, Londinium. If Rome hadn't taken her seriously before, they would now. Camulodunum was the beginning. But it wasn't revenge yet, not until the empire's beating heart in Britannia felt the fire. Londinium was the jewel of Roman Britannia. Founded just 17 years earlier, it had grown into a thriving hub of trade and administration. Merchants from across the empire filled its markets. Officials conducted imperial business under tiled roofs. Wealth flowed through its streets like water. But as Boudicca's army marched ever closer, that wealth turned into panic. Governor Suetonius, having rushed back from Wales with a small force, arrived just ahead of the rebellion. He looked at Londinium, crowded, sprawling, defenseless, and made a brutal decision. He abandoned it. The Roman legions stationed elsewhere were too far to help. Suetonius couldn't risk his limited troops in a city that couldn't be defended, so he withdrew, taking with him those who could flee. He left behind the old, the sick, the stubborn, and those too slow to believe a woman-led army could bring down Rome. They would learn otherwise. Boudicca's forces swept into Londinium like a thunderclap. There were no walls to scale, no gates to breach. The city was open, and she made it bleed. Her warriors tore through streets with the rage of generations. They didn't loot, they didn't occupy, they eradicated. The killing was systematic. Roman citizens were dragged from their homes. Entire families were butchered, some were impaled, others burned alive in temples. No quarter was given, and no Roman symbol was spared. Villas were torched, warehouses exploded into flame. The rising smoke could be seen from miles away, curling black against the British sky. It wasn't just a slaughter, it was a statement. The message, Rome is not invincible. Contemporary Roman sources like Tacitus and Cassius Dio estimated that tens of thousands died. Some accounts say the brutality exceeded even what occurred at Camulodunum. To Roman minds, this was not just a rebellion, it was apocalypse. And through it all rode Boudicca. She did not hide behind commanders. She led on a chariot, flanked by her daughters. She watched as the empire's pride crumbled beneath her. This wasn't senseless violence. To her, it was justice for what Rome had done to her family, her people, her land, and she wasn't finished. Ahead of her stood another Roman center, Verulamium. And beyond that, Rome's full retaliation. Rome had faced rebellions before. It had fought wars across continents, but never had it seen anything quite like Boudicca. She wasn't a general trained in tactics. She didn't speak Latin. She didn't wear polished armor. Yet she had burned 2 Roman cities to the ground and butchered thousands, citizens and soldiers alike. And now, as Verulamium, a prosperous Romanized town northwest of Londinium, went up in flames, the empire began to panic. Word of her rampage had reached the Roman Senate. Emperor Nero himself reportedly considered withdrawing entirely from Britannia. Imagine that. An empire that spanned from the deserts of Africa to the mountains of Germania, considering retreat because of one woman with a chariot and a cause. That's how much she terrified them. In truth, Boudicca's power wasn't just in her army, it was in what she represented. Rome saw itself as unshakable, its cities were eternal, its rule, destiny. But here was a Celtic queen, once beaten and humiliated, now leading a revolt that had reduced entire Roman settlements to ash. Every new city she burned wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a psychological blow. Verulamium followed the same fate as Camulodunum and Londinium. It was rich, Romanized, and completely unfortified. Boudicca's warriors unleashed a brutal fury, slaughtering inhabitants, tearing down temples, and reducing Roman infrastructure to rubble. Today, archaeological layers of thick ash beneath the modern town stand as silent testimony to a fire so fierce it carved a scar deep into the earth. But therein lay the paradox. With every victory, Boudicca's war machine grew heavier, slower. Her army swelled in number, yet supply lines stretched thin. Organization began to falter. Intoxicated by success, some tribes grew careless. Meanwhile, Rome, the empire famed for resilience, was quietly regrouping. Governor Suetonius was far from idle. Though he had retreated, he had not surrendered. He gathered reinforcements, pulling battle-hardened legions from across the province. He chose the high ground, studied the terrain, and readied himself for one decisive clash. Still, beneath the armor of every Roman soldier lay a shadow of doubt. Could they stop her? Because Boudicca was not merely waging war, she was rewriting the story of conquest. City after city burned, proof that Rome could bleed and queens could strike back. The final confrontation was imminent. The flames had spread as far as they could. Now, the storm would meet steel. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus picked his battleground with care. He was no ordinary officer. He was a survivor. While Boudicca's warriors celebrated their triumphs, Suetonius calculated every move. He chose a narrow defile, a confined space framed by forest and hills, where Boudicca's overwhelming numbers would count for little. His force, though small, about 10,000 men, was composed entirely of battle-hardened legionaries, disciplined and deadly. Boudicca's army, in contrast, was vast. Some accounts claim up to 200,000 warriors marched under her banner. But they were not soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, tribal chiefs, and freedom seekers. Fierce and inspired, but lacking training and formation. They believed sheer numbers would wash over Rome like a tidal wave. They were wrong. As the Britons advanced, Boudicca gave one last fiery speech. Standing atop her war chariot, flanked by her daughters, she reminded them of their suffering, the floggings, the rapes, the stolen lands, the burned homes. She called on the goddess Andraste, invoked their ancestors, and vowed victory or death. Her warriors roared in fierce agreement, convinced the gods were on their side. Then battle erupted. The Britons charged with raw, primal fury. But Suetonius held firm. He let them press in, packed tight in the narrow pass. At the perfect moment, the Roman counterattack was unleashed. Spears flew in disciplined waves. Shields locked into an unbreakable wall. Gladii, Roman short swords, cut deep into the tangled mass. Wave after wave of Britons crashed against an iron fortress and broke every time. Step by step, the Romans advanced, disciplined, precise, merciless. Behind the Britons, wagons and families had followed, expecting Roman defeat. Instead, they became a deadly trap. The warriors found no path to retreat. Panic surged. The narrow battlefield transformed into a slaughter. When the dust finally settled, tens of thousands of Britons lay dead. The rebellion was crushed. The empire had bent, but not broken. Boudicca had thrown everything at Rome. And though she lost the battle, the memory of her stand would echo louder than the clash of swords. Her final fate would remain a mystery. But her legend was already immortal. The battlefield was silent, the roar of war replaced by the moans of the dying. Boudicca had lost not just a battle, but a war she had set ablaze with her own hands. The ground was soaked with the blood of her people, and the ashes of their dreams drifted into the cold Britannic air. And Boudicca, she was nowhere to be found. There are no eyewitness accounts of her final breath, no clear details of her death. Roman historians offer conflicting stories. Some say she took poison, choosing death over capture. Others suggest she fell ill and died quietly in the aftermath. But what they agree on is this: she vanished. No chained queen was ever paraded through the streets of Rome. No public execution, no final humiliation. She simply disappeared, like a storm that burned itself out. But in that disappearance, something extraordinary happened. She became more than a queen. She became myth. Rome, shaken and humiliated by the scale of her rebellion, tried to bury the memory. But it was too late. Boudicca had become a name whispered in tribal songs and echoed in the sacred groves. To the Britons, she was not a defeated rebel. She was a martyr, a goddess of war and vengeance, a mother who had stood against the world's most powerful empire and made it bleed. Even among the Romans, there was reluctant respect. Tacitus, though Roman to the bone, painted her not as a barbarian, but as a formidable leader wronged by the arrogance of empire. Cassius Dio wrote of her commanding presence and terrifying speeches. They feared her, yes, but they also admired her resolve. And across the centuries, Boudicca refused to die. She would rise again in Victorian statues, in poems by Tennyson, in history books, in school lessons. She became a symbol of defiance, especially to women who saw in her story a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Her chariot, spiked wheels tearing across time, became a vehicle of resistance. And so, though her body may be lost to history, her voice never left. It rides with the wind. It screams in the fire. It echoes through every soul that has ever stood against oppression and whispered, "I will not kneel." Centuries have passed since Boudicca vanished into the mists of history, but her shadow still lingers across the British Isles. You can see her name carved into monuments, hear her invoked in political speeches, and feel her presence in the stubborn spirit of a land that never truly forgot her. In London, near Westminster Bridge, A bronze statue shows her standing tall on a war chariot, flanked by her daughters. Eyes set on the horizon, wheels raised in defiance. Below her, traffic hums and tourists wander, unaware that they walk in the echoes of her rebellion. But her legacy isn't just about statues, it's about what she represents. Boudica became more than the sum of her battles. She became an eternal question asked of every empire, every oppressor, every ruler who forgets the power of the people. What happens when the silenced rise? She was not perfect. Her revolt was marked by bloodshed and massacres. Tens of thousands died at the hands of her warriors. But history isn't written by saints. It's carved by those who dare to resist. And resistance, by its nature, is rarely clean. Still, what makes Boudica endure is not just her war against Rome. It's the fire she lit in the human imagination, a woman who lost everything and still stood tall, a queen who refused to be defined by the empire that tried to break her, a mother who turned her grief into a sword. Modern historians continue to debate her exact role, her decisions, her motives. But ask any Briton who Boudica was, and they won't recite footnotes. They'll tell you she was the queen who made Rome bleed, the woman who united tribes that had once warred with each other, the warrior who taught the world that dignity can rise even from devastation. And in that, she becomes more than a historical figure. She becomes a symbol of rebellion, of courage, of the unbreakable will to be free. Because even when Rome rebuilt its cities and redrew its maps, it could not erase her. Her flame still burns. In every fight against tyranny, in every voice that dares to say no, and in every soul that would rather die on their feet than live on their knees, Boudica is gone, but her legend rides forever. To the ancients, illness was never random. It wasn't just about bacteria, viruses, or rogue cells. Those explanations would come thousands of years later. In the ancient world, sickness was a symptom not of physical failure alone, but of a deeper disturbance, a disruption in balance, a fracture in the harmony between body, mind, soul, and nature. In Mesopotamia, disease was often seen as divine punishment. If someone fell ill, it was believed they had offended a god, broken a taboo, or attracted a curse. Diagnosis began not with symptoms, but with questions. What have you done? Who have you angered? Priests and healers worked together, interpreting omens, casting spells, and prescribing rituals alongside herbal treatments. In ancient China, balance took on a more systematic meaning through yin and yang and the 5 elements. Health was the state of equilibrium between opposing forces. Too much heat or cold, dryness or moisture would throw the body off. Practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine didn't just treat a cough. They asked when it started, what time of day it worsened, what emotions accompanied it. Healing was holistic. Herbs, acupuncture, and dietary changes were all tools to rebalance the inner cosmos. In Greece, the physician Hippocrates rejected the idea of gods punishing people with disease, yet he too saw health as harmony. His theory of the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, dominated Western medicine for centuries. Each humor was linked to a temperament and an element. An excess or deficiency of one would cause both physical symptoms and personality shifts. A melancholic person, for instance, was said to have too much black bile. Across cultures, one thread remained the same. Health meant wholeness, not just the absence of pain, but the presence of balance. Whether it was the Ayurvedic concept of doshas in India or the belief in spiritual possession within African healing traditions, ancient peoples understood that humans were never isolated beings. We were, and still are, inseparable from nature. And when nature's delicate balance was disturbed, it pushed back with force. So when ancient healers laid their hands upon the sick, they didn't merely seek physical symptoms. They listened for imbalance, an invisible disturbance rippling through body, mind, and spirit. Healing meant addressing not just wounds seen, but energies unseen, the subtle forces that shape life itself. In the land of pyramids and pharaohs, medicine was both science and sorcery. The ancient Egyptian healers, known as Swen W, were not just physicians, but sacred intermediaries bridging the mortal and divine realms. Their practices combined advanced medical knowledge with rituals and magic, inseparable threads in the tapestry of healing. To the Egyptians, the body could bruise, bleed, and break, yet every ailment was never purely physical. The spirit, the gods, and even the afterlife intertwined with illness, guiding treatment as much as anatomy or herbs. Much of what we know comes from texts like the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to 1550 BCE, a scroll brimming with remedies for toothaches, tumors, and more. Egyptian doctors performed surgeries, set broken bones, treated infections, and drained abscesses using copper instruments sterilized by fire. They knew how to read pulses, examine urine and feces, and use a diverse pharmacopoeia of herbs, many of which remain relevant today. But no healing began without divine blessing. Thoth, god of wisdom, was believed to have gifted humanity the secrets of healing, while Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague, was both feared and revered. She could unleash devastating epidemics or grant miraculous recovery. Spells were chanted over patients as herbs were applied, words carrying potent energy, incantations that were themselves medicine in sonic form. One of their greatest gifts was honey, used as a natural antiseptic long before bacteria were understood. Wounds were sealed with honey, resin, and lint. Garlic and onions were prescribed for heart health. Castor oil served as a laxative. Even moldy bread was pressed into infected wounds, a crude but effective antibiotic centuries ahead of modern science. Egyptian physicians treated common folk and royalty alike. Their skill earned respect across borders, with neighboring civilizations seeking their expertise for complex ailments. Some specialized in eyes, others in the stomach, and some focused on spiritual afflictions. Yet, in all their knowledge, there was no division between body and sacred spirit. A fever could stem from the Nile's mosquitoes or an angry ghost. Healing was a holistic dance, pleasing gods, purifying souls, restoring cosmic balance. To the ancient Egyptian, the healer's true role was not only to cure, but to restore order to the universe itself. Long before the rise of modern medicine, India was crafting its own healing legacy, one that viewed the human body not as a machine, but as a microcosm of the cosmos. This ancient system, Ayurveda, meaning the science of life in Sanskrit, is more than a medical practice. It is a philosophy, a way of living in harmony with nature, seasons, and spirit. Central to Ayurveda are the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These represent unique combinations of the five great elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Vata governs movement and communication. Pitta controls transformation, like digestion and metabolism. Kapha provides structure, stability, and lubrication. Every individual is born with a unique balance of these doshas. Illness arises when this balance is disturbed, whether by diet, stress, environment, or lifestyle, reminding us that health is a dynamic equilibrium deeply tied to the world around us. Ayurvedic texts like the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita date back over 2,000 years. These detailed manuals offer not only herbal remedies, but also guidance on surgery, obstetrics, psychology, and even ethics for physicians. Charaka focused primarily on internal medicine, emphasizing prevention as the first and most vital line of defense. Sushruta, meanwhile, is remembered as a pioneer of surgery, describing over 300 surgical procedures and more than 120 surgical instruments, many crafted from wood or metal. One of his most astonishing techniques was rhinoplasty, reconstructing a nose using a flap of skin from the patient's cheek or forehead. This was rarely cosmetic, rather, it was a crucial procedure to restore faces mutilated as punishment. Thousands of years before Western medicine caught up, Sushruta had already laid the groundwork. But Ayurveda's true strength lies in its holistic approach. Healing the body cannot be separated from healing the mind and soul. Treatments include herbal medicine, yoga, breathing exercises, pranayama, oil massages, abhyanga, and meditative fasting. Plants like turmeric, ashwagandha, neem, and tulsi were far more than food. They were medicines, purifiers and protectors of the life force. An Ayurvedic healer might treat a fever not just with herbs, but by adjusting your sleep schedule, examining your emotional health, and cleansing your digestive fire, or Agni. Ayurveda teaches that you are not separate from nature, you are nature. When you fall ill, it is nature's call to return to balance. In ancient China, health was never just about flesh and bone, it was about energy. The invisible vital force called qi, pronounced chi, flows through every living being, and the key to wellness lies in ensuring that qi moves freely, without blockage or excess. This foundational idea shaped one of the oldest continuous medical systems in the world, traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. To understand illness, ancient Chinese physicians first had to understand nature itself. They observed the rhythms of the seasons, the phases of the moon, the behavior of animals, and the turning of the cosmos. From these patterns emerged two core principles, yin and yang, and the five elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Yin and yang represented balance in all things. Yin was cool, dark, passive, and internal. Yang was hot, bright, active, and external. Every organ, emotion, and bodily function was classified under these opposing but complementary forces. Health was then seen as a dynamic balance between them. A fever was not simply a rise in temperature, it was an excess of yang. Fatigue might signal a depletion of yin. Diagnosis was an art. Physicians relied not on instruments, but on their senses. They examined the tongue, felt the pulse at multiple positions, listened to the tone of voice, and inquired about dreams, emotions, and bowel movements. Every detail offered insight into the balance or imbalance of qi. To restore health, they turned to a vast toolkit. Acupuncture, the insertion of fine needles into precise points along the body's meridians, was used to unblock qi and restore flow. Moxibustion, the burning of mugwort herb near these points, was applied to warm and stimulate circulation. Cupping, herbal formulas, qigong exercises, and strict dietary adjustments all played vital roles. The ancient text Huangdi Neijing, or the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, compiled around 2,000 years ago, remains the foundation of TCM today. It did not just list diseases, it explored causes, prevention, and lifestyle. It taught that emotions like anger, grief, and fear could disrupt organ function, and that healing required emotional balance as well as physical remedies. Chinese medicine never separated the person from the world around them. To treat the body, one must treat the climate, the soul, and the unseen energy within. In every heartbeat, the ancients believed qi was speaking, and the healer's task was to listen. In the temples of ancient Greece and the forums of Rome, medicine began to step away from the divine and into the realm of reason. But even here, the body was still seen as a delicate ecosystem ruled by balance and temperament. At the center of this worldview stood a theory that would shape Western medicine for over 1,000 years: the four humors. Developed by the Greek physician Hippocrates and later expanded by Roman doctors like Galen, the theory proposed that the human body was governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponded to an element: air, water, fire, and earth, and to a specific temperament. A healthy person had these fluids in balance. Illness? It was simply the result of too much or too little of one. If someone was feverish and aggressive, they might have excess yellow bile, a caloric imbalance. A sluggish, pale patient could be suffering from an overload of phlegm, linked to cold and moisture. Treatment therefore focused on restoring equilibrium through bloodletting, purging, special diets, and baths. But the Greeks didn't stop at fluids. They also believed in the healing power of observation and environment. The Hippocratic Oath, which still echoes in modern medicine, urged physicians to do no harm, to observe their patients carefully, and to treat the whole person, not just the disease. Hippocrates advised his students to consider the seasons, winds, water quality, and even the patient's mood. Healing sanctuaries, known as Asclepia, named after the god Asclepius, dotted the Greek landscape. These were more than hospitals, they were spiritual retreats. Patients slept in sacred dormitories, hoping to receive healing dreams. Ritual purification, exercise, diet, and prayer were all part of the cure. It was a space where reason and religion walked hand in hand. In Rome, medical practice evolved further with the rise of Galen, a Greek physician who served gladiators and emperors. He performed dissections on animals to understand anatomy, wrote hundreds of medical texts, and helped standardize humorism across the empire. Though some of his ideas were flawed, Galen's influence endured for centuries. Greco-Roman medicine, for all its mystical origins, began pushing toward a new idea: that the human body was a system. Complex, yes, but knowable. And if understood correctly, it could be brought back into harmony. Not through gods alone, but through reason, ritual, and the careful art of healing. Long before written texts and formal schools of medicine, indigenous peoples around the world were healing their communities using a deeper kind of knowledge, one passed down through stories, visions, and hands-on experience with the natural world. For these cultures, medicine wasn't a profession. It was a way of life, woven into daily rituals, seasonal rhythms, and sacred ceremonies. Among Native American tribes, healers were known as medicine men and women. but their role extended far beyond physical treatment. They were spiritual guides, storytellers, counselors, and keepers of ancestral knowledge. Illness was seen as a disruption in the person's relationship with nature, with the tribe, with the spirits, or with themselves. Healing required more than herbs. It demanded reconnection. Plants were at the heart of this sacred practice. From the Cherokee to the Lakota, each tribe held encyclopedic knowledge of the land, which root to chew for pain, which leaf to brew for fever, which bark to crush for wounds. Sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco were sacred gifts used in smudging rituals to cleanse both body and spirit. But medicine was never just about ingredients. It was also about intention, ceremony, and profound respect. Healers often worked alongside spiritual forces. They led sweat lodges, vision quests, and drumming circles. Illness was understood not only as physical ailment, but as a breach in taboos, spiritual possession, or soul loss, a condition where part of a person's essence had fled due to trauma. In these moments, rituals like soul retrieval were performed, calling the lost spirit back through chanting, dancing, or guided trance. This deep reverence for nature and spirit echoes across indigenous traditions worldwide. In the Amazon rainforest, shamans rely on potent plant medicines like ayahuasca, a hallucinogenic brew not for recreation but for profound healing insight. They believe the plants themselves are teachers, revealing the roots of suffering through visions. In Aboriginal Australia, bush medicine combines herbs, clays, and rituals passed down through the dreamtime, the ancestral era that continues to shape indigenous identity. Healing here is about restoring balance between body, land, ancestors, and the song lines that weave them together. These systems were never penned in books. They lived in songs, dances, and the very landscapes of the people. To indigenous healers, modern medicine may have its machines and laboratories, but the earth remains the first pharmacy. Healing is not about defeating disease. It's about remembering who we are. Across every ancient civilization, regardless of language or belief, one constant remained. Healing required more than herbs and surgery. It required spirit. Whether illness was seen as divine punishment, soul imbalance, or a breach with sacred forces, true healing began in the unseen world. And the doorway to that world was ritual. In Mesopotamia, long before formal medicine rose, people turned to exorcists and priests to battle illness. Diseases were believed caused by malevolent spirits or offended gods. Clay tablets reveal detailed healing rites where whispered chants accompanied treatments. Special figurines were buried beneath homes to ward off sickness. Rituals were not separate from treatment. They were the treatment. In ancient Egypt, no physician worked without invoking the gods. Before applying honey or bandaging, healers recited prayers to the god of wisdom, or Sekhmet, goddess of healing and wrath. Illness was more than physical attack, it was cosmic imbalance. Healing meant realigning the patient with Ma'at, the principle of truth, order, and harmony. In many African traditions, healers called Ngangas or Sangomas used drumming, dancing, and divination to diagnose and cure. They spoke with ancestors, summoned spirits, and often entered trance states to journey through the spiritual realm for their patients. Herbs mattered, but the unseen world was always consulted first. Even in classical Greece, ritual held a role. In the Asclepian, sacred healing temples, patients underwent rituals of purification, fasting, and prayer. At night, they slept in onkoimesis, dreaming beneath statues of Asclepius, the god of healing. These dreams were interpreted by temple priests to guide treatment. Ritual wasn't superstition. It was structure. It gave shape to suffering, a language to pain, and a sense that the illness had meaning. Through symbolic acts, people could transform fear into hope, isolation into connection, and chaos into control. And more than that, it reminded them that they were not alone. Even today, science studies the placebo effect, the power of belief, the healing impact of intention. The ancients didn't need the data. They already understood. Sometimes, a word spoken in reverence can heal deeper than any blade, because not all wounds are visible, and not all medicine is made of matter. When we think of ancient surgery, we often imagine crude tools, trembling hands, and unbearable pain. But the truth is far more impressive and more human. Across the ancient world, surgery was practiced with surprising precision. These early healers didn't have anesthesia, x-rays, or antiseptics, but they had skill, courage, and a remarkable understanding of the body. earned through generations of observation, trial, and often brutal necessity. In India, the Sushruta Samhita, written over 2,000 years ago, detailed more than 300 surgical procedures. Its author, Sushruta, is considered the father of surgery. He described techniques for removing tumors, setting bones, repairing hernias, and even reconstructing noses, a form of plastic surgery. His tools were sharp, varied, and carefully categorized: forceps, scalpels, probes, and needles, many made of iron or stone. Sushruta emphasized hygiene, surgical preparation, and the importance of understanding anatomy through dissection. Though this was often limited to animals, his surgical wisdom spread far beyond India, influencing both Islamic and Western practices centuries later. In ancient Egypt, surgical knowledge blended with ritual. Papyrus texts reveal procedures for stitching wounds, treating dislocated limbs, and draining abscesses. Tools like bronze knives, bone saws, and cauterizing rods have been found in tombs. They even practiced trepanation, cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure or treat head injuries. Amazingly, many skulls show signs of healing, meaning the patients survived. Trepanation wasn't limited to Egypt. In pre-Columbian Peru, archaeologists have discovered hundreds of trepanned skulls, often from warriors wounded in battle. Some surgeries were shockingly successful. In certain regions, over 80% of patients survived, based on bone regeneration. These early surgeons may have used coca leaves or fermented maize beer to dull pain along with herbal antiseptics. In the Greco-Roman world, Galen advanced surgical techniques by studying injured gladiators and dissecting animals. His insights into the nervous system and vascular pathways laid foundations for later anatomy. Roman military surgeons treated wounds on the battlefield with efficiency, using cautery clamps and ligatures. While surgery was always dangerous, it was also respected. It was the domain of those brave enough to cut into life itself, hoping to draw health from pain. These weren't butchers, they were artists of the blade. And though their knowledge was incomplete, their legacy lives on every time a scalpel is raised in healing, not harm. Today, we live in a world of digital diagnostics, robotic surgeries, and genetic mapping. We can scan a body in seconds and send prescriptions across oceans with a tap. And yet, in the quiet corners of modern medicine, the whispers of the ancient world still echo. You can find Ayurveda in yoga studios, Chinese herbal formulas in pharmacy aisles, and indigenous smudging ceremonies held in hospitals to honor patients' traditions. Medical students still take a version of the Hippocratic Oath, pledging to do no harm, just as their Greco-Roman predecessors once did. In operating rooms, we use precision tools that trace their lineage back to Sushruta's iron instruments. Concepts like holistic care, preventative medicine, and the mind-body connection, now cornerstones of integrative health, are rooted in the wisdom of ancient civilizations who saw healing not as a task, but as a relationship. Even modern science has come full circle. Research increasingly confirms what the ancients believed, that stress, isolation, and emotional trauma can weaken the immune system, disrupt sleep, and cause physical pain. Meditation, once a spiritual discipline, is now studied for its effects on brain health. Forest bathing, derived from Shinto and indigenous nature practices, is prescribed for anxiety. And the placebo effect, healing powered by belief, continues to puzzle researchers who once dismissed it. It's easy to see ancient medicine as outdated, superstition, folklore, primitive guesswork. But when we look closer, we see something profound. A worldview that treated illness not just as a broken machine, but as a disruption in being. A signal that something somewhere was out of harmony. And that idea still matters because medicine isn't only about treatment, it's about meaning, about comfort, about being seen and understood. The ancients knew this instinctively. Whether they used chants, needles, leaves, or blades, they understood that healing was sacred. Today, as we push further into the future of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and personalized medicine, perhaps we are not leaving the ancient world behind. Perhaps we are returning to it with new tools, but the same human heart. A heart that still longs for balance, for wholeness, for healing, not just of body, but of spirit. Her name drifts through history like a half-remembered melody. Sappho, a poetess from the island of Lesbos, born sometime around 630 BCE, whose voice once stirred the hearts of listeners under starlit skies, and whose words, even in fragments, still echo with longing. Unlike the grand warriors and kings of ancient Greece, Sappho's fame came not from conquest, but from emotion. Her domain was not the battlefield, but the human soul. She wrote of love and jealousy, beauty and despair, joy and yearning. She captured the fleeting moments, a glance, a blush, a tremble, and held them in verse like pressed flowers, fragile yet eternal. Very little is known of her life. No portraits, no diaries. What we have are traces, a few lines preserved by ancient scholars, quotes embedded in other works, and the ruins of papyrus scrolls lost to time. And yet these fragments shine. The Greek philosopher Plato once called her the 10th muse. Centuries later, poets, translators, and dreamers would seek her out, piecing together her life like fragments of an unfinished song. Sappho was likely born into a noble family on Lesbos, an island nestled in the northeastern Aegean Sea. This was a place where music and learning flourished, where poetry was woven into the very fabric of social life. She may have had siblings, a daughter, and even political enemies, though the records remain vague. She lived through exile and unrest, moments of silence and moments filled with song. In a world where most women's voices were confined to the home or silenced altogether, Sappho defied that silence. She stood apart, not through rebellion, but through beauty. She wrote in the Aeolic dialect, crafting short, vivid lyrics meant to be sung to the lyre. Her style was intimate and rich with imagery. Evening star, you bring back all that the shining day has scattered. Words like these have outlived empires. And then, as quietly as she appeared in the records, she faded away. Much of her work was lost, burned, buried, or dismissed, but what remains proves one thing. She didn't need monuments. Her poems were her lasting monument. Today, when we speak of passion in verse, of love without shame, of longing that transcends centuries, we are still whispering the name Sappho. To understand Sappho, you must first understand Lesbos, the island that cradled her voice. Lesbos was no mere backwater. In the ancient Greek world, it was a thriving center of art, music, and philosophy. With its fertile valleys, olive groves, and coastal winds scented with salt and flowers, Lesbos was both a physical paradise and a cultural gem. It wasn't Athens, and it didn't need to be. It had its own rhythm, slower, more sensual, and deeply rooted in lyric tradition. Here, music wasn't decoration, it was devotion. The lyre and aulos echoed through homes and temples. Poetry was sung, not simply read. And in this world of sound and nature, Sappho's voice was born. She lived in Mytilene, the bustling heart of the island, where politics thrived alongside art. The island was home to poets and philosophers, rival factions, and shifting alliances. Sappho herself was once exiled, perhaps to Sicily, amid political unrest. But Lesbos always called her home. It was her muse. Lesbos was also a rare space of female community in the ancient world. Aristocratic girls were educated in music, poetry, and ritual. Some scholars believe Sappho led a kind of theiasos, a circle or school where young women learned lyric, poetry, dance, and devotion to the goddess Aphrodite. This was no formal education as we know it, but a sacred, creative sisterhood, a space where bonds formed that were emotional, intellectual, and possibly romantic. Sappho wrote directly to these women, not as distant muses, but as real presences in her life. She addressed them by name, mourned their departures, celebrated their beauty, and confessed her love with searing honesty. In one fragment, she writes, "I have not had one word from her. I beg you, bring her back to me." These lines don't come from myth or theater. They come from a lived world, a circle of women singing by lamplight, weaving emotion into song. And though time would later distort her legacy, framing it with scandal or speculation, Lesbos was the soil from which her truth grew. Not just a location on a map, but a cultural cradle of passion, artistry, and female expression. Sappho didn't just live on Lesbos. She became Lesbos, its breath, its heart, its voice. In an age when the great epics of Homer praised gods and heroes, and men filled scrolls with battles and conquests, Sappho wrote about the heart. She didn't sing of war. She sang of a trembling hand, a shy glance, a voice that made her body shiver. She was one of the first poets in Western history to write in the first person, I. Not just narrating events, but feeling them. And what she felt was love, longing, jealousy, tenderness, and desire. Most astonishing of all, she wrote as a woman to women about women. In ancient Greece, a woman's voice was often confined to the home or silenced entirely. Public life, literature, politics, philosophy, these belonged to men. But Sappho stepped outside those walls, not with rebellion, but with rhythm. Her poetry did not demand space. It created its own, a private universe where emotion was not weakness, but power. And within that space, she did something radical. She named the women she loved. She didn't reduce them to symbols. She didn't speak in metaphor alone. She remembered their laughter, their perfume, the way they braided their hair. In one fragment, she describes the sensation of seeing a beloved. He is equal to the gods, that man who sits beside you, who listens to your sweet voice and watches your lovely laughter. Oh, it makes my heart beat fast. Here, Sappho is the onlooker, watching the woman she adores speak to another. Her jealousy is quiet, aching, deeply human. In just a few lines, she captures the full weight of unrequited love, something every listener then or now can understand. Her words carried the erotic, but never the vulgar. She wrote of sensuality with the care of a painter, the curve of a neck, the softness of sleep, the way moonlight touched skin. She didn't separate beauty from intimacy. They were one. Because of this, later centuries often misunderstood or censored her. Some tried to erase her queerness. Others mythologized her heartbreak into tragedy. But none of that diminishes the truth of her voice. A woman who wrote honestly, lyrically, and bravely about love. Not in theory, but as someone who had lived it deeply, openly, and without apology. Sappho didn't just write poetry. She composed music for the soul. Her verses were never meant for silent reading. In ancient Greece, poetry was alive. It was sound, breath, vibration. Sappho's form was the lyric, short and intensely personal, meant to be performed with a lyre, a small stringed instrument cradled in the lap, plucked gently while the voice carried the words like a breeze over the sea. This was the heart of lyric poetry, and it's where the word lyrical comes from. The poetry wasn't epic. It didn't tell long tales of war and gods. It was intimate, emotional, and immediate. The lyric was a whisper, a confession, a love letter sung beneath fig trees or in candlelit rooms. And Sappho was its undisputed master. Her poems were crafted in Aeolic Greek, a regional dialect rich in softness and rhythm. Her preferred meter, now called the Sapphic stanza, flowed with a particular beat, 3 long lines followed by a shorter, punchy one, like a sigh at the end of a longing thought. It was subtle and musical, like the rising and falling of breath during a quiet moment between lovers. She would have performed these songs surrounded by women, students, companions, maybe even priestesses. These gatherings, possibly ritual or educational in nature, were also spaces of freedom, spaces where emotion, song, and body were not fragmented, but whole. Through these performances, Sappho trained others in the art of composition, creating not just poems, but a culture. We can only imagine what it sounded like, the soft twang of strings, the clear rise of her voice, the stillness of listeners hanging on each syllable. Many of her poems open not with statements, but with questions or invocations. Like the start of a conversation or a prayer, "Come to me now, O golden-throned Aphrodite, and free me from hard care." These were poems that reached up to gods and inward to desire, and yet they feel surprisingly modern. You could set them to music today, and they'd still stir something raw and real. Sappho turned poetry into song, and in doing so, she reminded the world that emotion is music, that every heartache, every thrill of touch or tremble of voice deserves a melody, and hers is one still echoing centuries later. For every line of Sappho's poetry we have today, dozens, perhaps hundreds, are lost. What remains are fragments, shards of emotion and sound, phrases ripped from their original songs, drifting across time. Some are complete stanzas, others are mere whispers, a single word, a sliver of longing, a closing thought without a beginning. And yet even these broken pieces pulse with life, like embers glowing in the ash of something once brilliant. Why did so much vanish? Time, war, and deliberate destruction. Sappho's works were once collected into 9 volumes, organized in the famed Library of Alexandria. These were likely copied and recited throughout the classical world. But with the fall of that library, much of ancient literature was lost. Later, as Christian influence rose, many works deemed pagan or immoral were suppressed, neglected, or intentionally burned. Sappho's poetry, filled with passion, especially same-sex love, made her a target. By the medieval period, she became a ghost. Her name survived, but her voice was nearly silenced. Only through quotations by other authors, preserved in grammars, commentaries, or philosophical works, did bits of her poetry escape extinction. These fragments were often cited for their style or vocabulary, not for their emotional force, yet the feelings still bled through. Then came the papyri. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists working in the sands of Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, uncovered thousands of fragments of ancient manuscripts. Among these treasures were torn and faded lines of Sappho's poetry, songs lost to the world for over 1,000 years. More discoveries followed. In 2004, a nearly complete poem surfaced on a papyrus wrapped around a mummy in Germany. Each recovery felt like a resurrection, a glimpse into a voice long silenced. Yet so much remains missing. Today, we read Sappho only in echoes. What we yearn for is not just the words she left behind, but the stories and songs she might have shared if history had allowed her to speak without interruption. There is something hauntingly fitting in this survival through fragments. Sappho wrote of impermanence, fleeting moments, and beauty slipping through fingers like sand. Perhaps it is only appropriate that her poetry arrives to us not as a monument, but as a mystery, a puzzle pieced together by lovers of language, music, and the heart, a voice once drowned by fire, still burning. Sappho's poetry was too honest to escape judgment. In her lifetime, she was admired, even celebrated as a master of lyric poetry. Plato called her the 10th muse, elevating her among the divine. Yet as centuries passed and cultures shifted, her legacy was twisted, silenced, or scandalized, depending on the times. Why? Because she wrote about love and not the kind history found comfortable. Much of her work centers on deep affection and desire for women. She praised their beauty, mourned their absence, confessed jealousy, and celebrated intimacy. In the culture of Lesbos, especially among aristocratic women, such bonds were accepted, even honored. But later generations, influenced by Roman, Christian, and Victorian values, struggled with this truth. Rather than face it, they rewrote her story. Medieval scribes ignored her. Renaissance translators softened her language. Victorians cast her as a tragic romantic, heartbroken over a man, inventing myths, like the tale of her leaping from a cliff over love for a ferryman named Phaon, a story absent from her authentic work. This fabrication served a purpose: to erase her queerness, to make her pain more palatable, her desires more conventional. Some critics reduced her poetry to mere education or platonic affection. Others dismissed her as indecent. And yet she persisted. Even amid scandal, Sappho's name survived. In the 19th century, when open discussion of same-sex love remained taboo, her legacy quietly became a coded symbol of queer identity. The words sapphic and lesbian now stand as terms for romantic love between women, rooted in her name and her island home. She became, whether by choice or fate, a figure of resistance, a poetic ancestor to those whose loves were silenced. Debates continue. Who was she? A teacher, a lover, a myth, a threat? Perhaps the better question is, why are we still afraid of her truth? Sappho didn't write to fit categories. She wrote what she felt. She named beauty, confessed longing, and lived through verse. Her scandal was not her actions, it was her honesty. She dared to write desire, and for that, history tried to muffle her voice. But it never succeeded. If any divine presence hovered over Sappho's life and work, it was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and irresistible desire. To Sappho, Aphrodite was no mere myth. She was a muse, a confidant, a companion in moments of passion and heartbreak. Many of Sappho's most powerful verses are not just poems of love, they are prayers to Aphrodite, invocations, pleas, and arguments made in verse when longing became too heavy to bear. In her most famous surviving poem, Ode to Aphrodite, Sappho doesn't simply praise the goddess, she speaks to her directly, almost like a friend who's heard this pain before. Come to me now. If ever you have answered my voice in the past, free me from hard care. Fulfill all that my heart longs to achieve. There is no shame in this vulnerability, no fear in expressing desire. Sappho's love is never portrayed as sinful or weak. It is divine, something sacred enough to bring a goddess down from the heavens. In the ancient world, Aphrodite wasn't just about romance. She ruled over attraction, seduction, the chemistry between bodies, the ache of separation. To call on her was to recognize that love could wound just as much as it could thrill. Sappho captured that duality perfectly. She didn't idealize love, she lived inside its contradictions. She wrote of its sweetness and its sting, its beauty and its cruelty. In another poem she writes, "Love shook my soul like the wind on the mountain, troubling the oak trees." Here, love isn't gentle. It's violent, elemental, something that tears through the self without asking permission. By placing Aphrodite at the center of her emotional world, Sappho elevated longing into something mythic. Her poems blurred the line between the personal and the divine, between everyday emotion and cosmic force. And in doing so, she helped build a literary legacy where love wasn't just a theme, it was a form of worship. For Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't an abstract deity, she was a mirror, a force that reflected back all the intensity, the confusion, and the beauty of the human heart. And in every line of Sappho's verse, the goddess of love listens and replies. Like her poetry, Sappho's death is a mystery wrapped in myth. No one knows exactly when she died, how old she was, or even where she spent her final years. Some say she died peacefully on Lesbos, surrounded by the sea and the songs she loved. Others, especially later Roman poets, spun tragic fables that she leapt to her death from the white cliffs of Lefkada, heartbroken over an unrequited love for the handsome ferryman Phaon. But there's no historical evidence for that story. It seems more like an invention, a way for a male-dominated literary tradition to reframe her love and suffering into a heterosexual tragedy. It turned the powerful poetic voice of a woman who loved women into a victim of unreturned affection for a man. A neat ending, perhaps, but a false one. The truth is simpler and more profound. Sappho disappeared as quietly as she arrived. After her death, her work lived on for centuries. She was studied by philosophers, quoted by playwrights, and sung in performances across the ancient Greek world. Her poetry was preserved in 9 books, a treasure trove of lyric verse. For a time, her fame rivaled Homer's. But history is not kind to voices that challenge its norms. With the rise of the Roman Empire, and later the dominance of Christian moral codes, Sappho's openly emotional and sensual poems, especially those celebrating female love, fell out of favor. Her writings were no longer recopied. Her volumes were left to decay in libraries that would eventually burn or crumble. Some believe her works were intentionally destroyed by early church officials who saw her songs as dangerous. By the Middle Ages, her name remained, but her words were mostly gone. It would take over 1,000 years before fragments of her verses resurfaced, unearthed from Egyptian trash heaps, or quoted in ancient grammars. Piece by piece, she was reborn, not through myth, but through survival. Her death may be lost to time, but her disappearance was never total. She lingered in whispers, in stolen lines scribbled in margins, in the persistent ache of voices that refuse to be forgotten. Sappho didn't need a heroic death. Her poems were already immortal, and in the gaps where her words once lived, we can still feel the shape of her spirit, yearning, unfinished, but never truly gone. Sappho's life may be lost in shadows, her verses scattered and incomplete, but her influence has never dimmed. If anything, it has only grown stronger, like a candle that flickers but refuses to go out. In every age, someone has rediscovered her. In the Renaissance, scholars pored over her fragments, marveling at her delicate command of emotion. In the Romantic era, poets like Byron and Shelley invoked her name. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as conversations around gender and identity began to reawaken, Sappho became a symbol of queer resilience, of feminine artistry, of emotional freedom. Her name lives on in language itself. Sapphic, used to describe romantic love between women. Lesbian, taken from the island of her birth, now a global identity. These words are not just terms. They are echoes of her life, proof that a voice can ripple across millennia and still reshape how we understand love and expression. Artists, writers, and musicians continue to be drawn to her. Painters have imagined her at the lyre, bathed in moonlight. Poets have translated her again and again, each version seeking the pulse beneath the words. Modern authors have reimagined her, reclaimed her, resurrected her in novels, songs, and plays. And through it all, one thing remains clear. Sappho speaks to something universal. It doesn't matter that her poems are broken. It doesn't matter that her biography is blurred. What matters is the emotion that burns beneath the words, the trembling joy of desire, the ache of separation, the sacredness of beauty. These are feelings we all carry. She just found a way to sing them. Perhaps that's her true immortality, not the marble statues or the scholarly footnotes, but the way a few lines from over 2,000 years ago can still make someone pause, breathe, and feel less alone. Sappho's gift was never just poetry. It was presence. She made feeling an art. She made longing a form of truth. And in doing so, she became more than a poet. She became a mirror for anyone who has ever loved quietly, deeply, or in defiance of the world. And as long as human hearts break and heal through language, Sappho will remain, not just remembered, but felt. After all these stories and deep insights into ancient medicine and healing wisdom from different cultures, are you satisfied with what you've just discovered? These lessons are not just history. They're a source of inspiration for how we understand health and balance in our lives today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Wishing you a peaceful night and the sweetest dreams.